and from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda, based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. What is the best way to pray? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. Jesus Christ and Sri Krishna both advised praying to God as personal, yet both emphasized also that God is above form and that he must be sought ultimately in infinity. As Jesus put it, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Yet he spoke of God constantly as our Heavenly Father. In what is known as the Lord's Prayer, he proposed a very human prayer to the Heavenly Father, asking fulfillment for all our spiritual needs. The Bhagavad Gita explains that man, living as he does in a human body, finds it difficult to worship infinity as though the ego and body didn't even exist. Far better for human beings, Krishna says, to work with reality as we know it, than to affirm a reality of which the human mind is incapable of forming any clear notion. Encouraging the devotee in this direction, he says, "O Arjuna, be thou a yogi." That is to say, be one who works with, not in rejection of, the energies of the body and the natural tendencies of the mind. In the 12th chapter of the Gita, Arjuna says, "Those who ever steadfast worship thee, Krishna, God, as devotees, that is to say, in an I and thou relationship, and those who contemplate thee as the immortal, unmanifested spirit, which group is the better versed in yoga?" The Blessed Lord replied, "Those who, fixing their minds on me, adore me, ever united to me through supreme devotion, are in my eyes the perfect knowers of yoga. Those whose strict aim is union with the unmanifested choose a more difficult way. Arduous for embodied beings is the path of dedication to the Absolute, the path, that is to say, of Jnana Yoga. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind." We as human beings have trouble directing love towards something that we can't visualize. And there's a wonderful story that I just came across recently in studying the life of Lahiri Mahashaya, and I hadn't heard this story before, so I wanted to share it with you. Lahiri had, in keeping with his role as a householder and trying to take care of a family and live with relatives and all the things that we as normal human beings in this world do, he had had some family trouble with his inherited property, and so he renounced it. He gave it to those who were squabbling about it, and he went off and lived by himself with his family. Rather than go into all the ramifications of court cases and all that sort of thing, he just put it aside. It made his life very difficult because he didn't make very much money as an accountant in this job that he had. But he had had a good education, an education which was very full of foresight from his father's perspective, because his father sent him to an English-speaking school from the very beginning. And so he had this background in English. He spoke 5 languages: English, Hindi, Bengali, Sanskrit, and I think Persian was the 5th one. Anyway, he had this background. He spoke very excellent English. And so he was able to get this job, but it didn't pay very much. And so he was a tutor to bring in extra income. And by the way, his wife was extremely frugal and resourceful. And she also was very generous and helped anyone who came. She felt it was very important to give and to serve. And at the same time, she was thrifty enough to be able to afford to buy the house that they finally got in Benares. And that was due to her and the grace of God, of course. But anyway, so Lahiri was a tutor, and he had a good reputation as being a learned Brahmin. And the king of Benares hired Lahiri to tutor his son. Well, at the same time, around that same era, this same king of Benares held a conference for a local Swami who had a big following. His name was Swami Dayananda Saraswati. And he and his followers believed that God should not be worshipped in images or in form. He would call these statues of the deities dolls. Why should we worship dolls, he said. And so this conference was Swami Dayanand and his followers debating against the Brahmins and priests. And Dayanand was very skillful, and he kept winning all the arguments until the last day of the conference was over. And at the end, he said, if anyone wants to challenge me one last time, anyone, I will be here at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you can come and challenge me. Otherwise, I and my followers are going to go through all the temples in Benares and break the images and throw them in the Ganges. Well, it happened that one of Lahiri Mahashaya's disciples, devotees, was there at the conference. And as usual, he came to Lahiri in the evening. Lahiri would have his disciples meditating with him through the night, often. And so Lahiri noticed this disciple was very heavy-hearted. And he said, what is troubling you? What has happened? And the man explained what Dayanand was going to do. And Lahiri said to this disciple, go to Swami Dayanand and tell him that someone will come to defend the other side and will meet him at 10 o'clock in the morning. So Lahiri's disciple gave him that message, and through the night, all through the night, people were hearing this news that someone was going to defend the form of God in the temples, but they didn't know who it was. Lahiri Mahashaya, here, for those of you who don't know him, was a very secret yogi. He didn't want any fanfare around him. He didn't want an organization. he didn't even want his photograph taken. And through a very special circumstance, which I won't get into, we have this one photograph of him that he allowed to be taken. Anyway, as the word got out, the palace where this conference was being held of the king of Benares was packed with people. Everyone from around had come, and they were clamoring to hear who would defend their beloved images. And at 10 o'clock, Lahiri Mahashaya arrived, and he reverently addressed the whole congregation. And then he turned very respectfully to Swami Dayanand and said, I am here to defend our traditional way of worshiping Lord Vishwanath, the Lord of the universe. Please tell me why you think this worship should be stopped. And Swami Dayanand said, Brahma is one, truth is one. It is a unspotted, undifferentiated, pure consciousness. That is the truth. So why do we worship dolls? And Lahiri Mahashaya said, what you are saying is true. Brahma is one and eternal and undifferentiated, pure consciousness. However, and then Swami Dayananda's disciples started making racket. They started ho, 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 making all this noise and disrupted the whole thing. And they were trying to make Lahiri nervous, and they were trying to prevent all the people from hearing him. And so Lahiri respectfully asked Swami Dayananda, please advise your disciples to behave courteously so that I may continue. And Swami Dayananda did ask his disciples, please, would you be quiet so that we can hear what this man is saying? But they wouldn't stop. And they just kept pounding their feet and clamoring and shouting. And so Lahiri Mahashaya moved his jaw and mouth. I don't know what it looked like, but he did something strange with his mouth. And suddenly, all those who were making noise had the same thing happen to their jaw, and they couldn't speak. And in this way, Lahiri maintained a tranquil atmosphere. Well, it was tranquil, except that the disciples of Swami Dayanand were anything but tranquil. They were muted, but they were very upset. And then Lahiri continued. He said, just as water is liquid, and yet it can be solid form when it is frozen, so that pure consciousness of God, when it is in the forms of creation, is still God. And in that way, it's good to worship form. And much as when St. Anthony defended the living Godhead of Jesus Christ, everyone agreed. There was no more squabbling. Swami Dayananda understood. Somehow this simple thought had never crossed his mind, and if it had crossed his mind, it never got to his heart. And he completely understood. He gave it all up. And Lahiri Mahashaya said to Swami Dayanand, now please heal your devotees so that their jaws are unlocked. And Swami Dayanand tried, and he couldn't do it. So he asked Lahiri Mahashaya, please, would you kindly help my devotees? And the king of Benares also said, please, would you heal them? And Lahiri said, all right, go to the temple of Lord Vishwanath, the Lord of the universe, and get some water from that temple and bring it here and put a few drops in each person's mouth, and they will be all right. And so it happened. And through that experience, the king of Benares, whose son was being taught by Lahiri, realized what an incredible divine yogi Lahiri Mahashaya was, and he became his disciple. So let us use this example of form and formlessness. God created everything that is from himself, and each entity is a little frozen drop of that cosmic consciousness. So let us worship him in spirit and in truth and in everything, especially within ourselves. If we can realize that divine presence, all will be clear, all will be understood.
That's such a delightful story, and so sort of dramatic in a very human way, in a very relatable way, because unfortunately one of the things that has happened in religion down through the ages and down through all traditions in one way or another is that people will have a divine experience and they will understand it as a divine experience, and then they will try to impose it on somebody else and say, see, I did it this way. Therefore, you have to do it this way too, and you will have the same experience. And now, in a deep way, it's actually true that if we go inward and we go upward, we will have a divine experience. But everybody's way of going inward and upward is unique to that person. Swami Kriyananda used to say, there are as many Christianities as there are Christians. In fact, you could probably say there are more versions of Christianity than there are Christians, because each Christian is going to have several, depending on which day of the week or depending on where they are at in their spiritual growth and their spiritual life. I remember reading that in the Hindu tradition there were, at the time of this writing, there were 300 million different forms of God, different deities, different ways of relating to God. Which, if you think about it, I don't know if you could count to 300 million in one lifetime. It's a lot, it's a long way. That's a lot of deities. I happen to think that the population of India at around that time was probably around 300 million. And a little light bulb goes off. Sort of seems like one per capita. Each person gets their own. Although, if you go to an Indian home, you will often find quite a few, like more than one per capita, because there's the family deity, there's the local deity, there's the whatever Ishtadevata, whatever form they are most drawn to individually, etc., etc. The bottom line is that the best way to pray is the one that engages your heart, that engages your own awareness and consciousness deeply and makes that connection with God and makes it real and dynamic, makes it intimate. I was walking the other day and was, walking around the track not far from here, and a young woman walked by on the sidewalk. I couldn't see her face, so I couldn't identify her age, but I was sort of guessing a teenager. She was on her phone as she walked along the sidewalk there, and was texting vigorously, or following something vigorously that was obviously very important to her. And I had this intuitive understanding somehow. I don't usually sort of aspire to this kind of thing, but in the spirit of what comes of itself, let it come, I sort of let this come. I had a kind of awareness of her awareness, and I didn't really like it. What I was aware of was how intensely personal and intensely self-involved she was, because it was like, worship began at the mirror in the morning. I had a friend tell me that a young woman that he knew, a relative, wore out the mirror. It was like so much attention upon the mirror in the morning. And I remember other people in my life who, kind of worshiped at the mirror in the morning. But what happens is that there's this sense of, and this morning I confess I had to get in front of the mirror, I had to shave, I had to, kind of clean up a little bit. And, oh, there he is again. The old chap is still there, more or less the same, maybe an extra wrinkle or whatever, it's still stuck with the same body. I mean, it's not that we shouldn't ever look in the mirror. I mean, it's appropriate to look presentable and decent, but to sort of make a worship out of it, to kind of get all tangled up in it, what it does is it creates this sense of, this is who I am. I am this body. Well, golly, if we're this body, then every time there's an ache or a pain, every time that somebody says, oh, well, you look silly, don't you, wearing that outfit? How can you think of going outside wearing, or whatever? I mean, I remember some of these discussions growing up. You'd try some new style. I mean, I remember the bell-bottom jeans. Anybody go back that far? We're really dating ourselves, but, I mean, I remember the size I wore touched the ground, which of course meant that you would walk, your heels would step on the back and the backs would kind of wear off. I mean, it was a ridiculous look. But it was the thing back then, It was like you had to have that certain look. And we can so easily get tangled up in that. And then we get tangled up in, what do people think? And if they think well of us, oh, isn't that wonderful? And if they think badly of us, oh my God. Growing up with sisters, I remember being sort of both amused and amazed that this one question would come up, which was, we'd be going out to something, we'd be going somewhere to be with other people. Well, what are you going to wear? Well, what are you going to wear? What are people wearing? And again, I get the concept. It's like, you don't want to be dressed to the nines if everybody is dressed casually. You don't want to overdress. On the other hand, if everybody's dressed to the nines, you don't want to show up in, flannel shirt and beat up jeans and, be totally out of sync. Okay, I get that. But I just remember being absolutely uncomprehending of this at the time. It was like, what do you mean, what am I going to wear? I'm going to wear clothes. I mean, what? We're going out. You just dress decently, whatever. I don't know what you wear. Just the concept that, I remember asking this question in church or about church, because I was aware that people like to get all hoity-toity, all fancy for church. And I somehow had the intuitive understanding that it wasn't because they wanted to please God. It was because they wanted to look nice for everybody else and have everybody else go, oh, how nice, this guy's got a really nice suit on and this lady's got a really nice dress on and whatever. It was entirely about the impression that could be made on others. So I asked the unaskable question, does God really care how we dress? Ooh, that didn't go over very well at all. That was like, no. You can't ask that question. And I didn't get a good answer. Never mind that there is a good answer that would have satisfied me if somebody had known to give it to me, which is, no, you're not dressing for God to please God in the sense of God cares that, the red tie or the blue tie. Rather, you're dressing to uplift your own consciousness. And that thought did occur to me later on. And on a day of a big test, I would dress up in a suit and a tie, and people would look at me like I was crazy. What do? You go, is there a funeral? I mean, why? Nobody wore a suit and a tie to high school. It was unthinkable. But I would do it because I felt presentable, I was ready, and I would take my test, and then I'd go home and change clothes to whatever I wanted to wear. What is the best way to pray? That way which will uplift our consciousness. Not to argue about should we worship dolls, should we worship the unmanifest, should we worship this way, the other way, some other way. We should worship in tune with our own nature in such a way that we feel uplifted. And draw from others, draw from the inspiration of others who have gone before us, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yogananda gave us these amazing meditation techniques to follow and practice so that when it comes time to pray, we can offer that prayer sincerely and wholeheartedly. Swami related a kind of heart-rending story, in a way, of a relative of his who had experienced some very difficult situation. A child was seriously ill or seriously injured. I don't know that he ever identified the particulars. But what he said was, this relative wanted desperately to pray, and she found her mind completely distracted by worry, by fear, by doubt, by, all the commotion of life. And his comment in this regard was, and she was sort of appealing to him, can't you help me to pray, seriously, with all my heart, with all my focus? And, what he had to say was, well, you have to learn, you have to practice. It doesn't come automatic. Most people, when they are in that kind of situation, pray about as one-pointedly as they're ever going to pray in their whole lives. When your life is on the line, I forget who had the apocryphal saying that knowing that you're going to go in front of a firing squad in 12 hours has a marvelous way of focusing your attention. And the dire circumstances of life can often focus us, but then often there is this sense of bodily fear, bodily attachment. And we have to learn to overcome that in not some abstraction, but in divine joy, in divine realization. And that's what these techniques are here to give us, is the actual experience of it. Not the theoretical knowledge of it. Yeah, okay, Yogananda experienced this, and other saints experienced this, and it's that, far away, and you have to go find some sadhu in India up on a mountaintop, sitting in a cave, waiting for you to come and ask your question, and then thump you on the head or the chest and put you into samadhi. No, it's about practicing it, because otherwise we could go to that sadhu, we could find that saint, get thumped on the chest, perhaps even have a divine experience. And what would we do with it? We'd have to do something with it. We'd have to live it in daily life. We'd have to, in other words, we would have to receive it. So what's beautiful about this subject is, what is the best way to pray is to learn to listen, to learn to dive into meditation so that we actually can hear God's response. We make our prayer, but we make that prayer in a sense of union, in a sense of unity and oneness with God as God's child. Then there isn't this wheedling, beggarly kind of consciousness that's sort of saying, oh God, I know I'm not worthy, blah, 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 blah. No, it's just, it's like you would go to your mom or your dad and say, Mom, my shoes are too small. I guess I'm growing too fast or whatever. Oh God, okay, yeah, let's go to the store and get you some shoes. I mean, it's no big deal in one sense, but we also just learn to accept God's timing. Because sometimes there's a little delay. The kid wants the ice cream or the kid wants to stay. Anybody remember the days of wanting to stay up all night? You're a little kid and it's like, I don't want to go to bed. Everybody's having a great time. It's 10 o'clock or it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever the bedtime is. I don't want to go to bed. And then you finally, as a teenager or somewhere along the trail, you get the chance and you stay up the whole night. Oh boy, isn't it awesome? And then the next day, it's like, pow! Just moody and grouchy and tired and crabby and whatever. And now, most people, it's like, would kill for a good night's sleep. It's like, stay up all night? Are you crazy? God is asking for that chance at our self-offering, willing self-offering, like a child would offer, like a child would feel that connection to the mother or the father. In that sense of oneness, there is no separation. There is no sort of distance. Let's learn to pray in that way so that we can have that divine connection.